Hey, welcome to the One Piece at a Time Distilling Institute with your host, the alchemist of Indiana's Black Forest, Alan Bishop. Hey, this channel is all about home distilling and legal distilling. If you've got questions, reach out to us in the comments below, social media, or via bishopshomegrown@gmail.com. And don't forget to check out thealchemistcabinet.com. Hey, what's up guys? Back again with the One Piece at a Time Distilling Institute, another talking head video. So, a little sweaty, a little hot. Just got back from Bex Mill not too awful long ago. You guys might have heard me talk about that either on the Sacred and Profane or here on the One Piece at a Time Distilling Institute channel on YouTube. Bex Mill is a historic mill here in Washington County, Indiana. It celebrated its 215th birthday. It is the last extant water wheel mill in Washington County of 64 original mills, and it's what I consider kind of my home place, and it's become a place where we go do a lot of demonstrations. I try to get other moonshiners or distillers out there where I can. Try to do something cool every time that we go out there. Try to do something fun, something educational. Tell people that come through that maybe don't know about the history of distilling in southern Indiana, the history of mills and distilling in southern Indiana. Give them some of the background and history of the Black Forest of this region, Washington, Orange, Lawrence, Crawford, Harrison, and Perry counties. And today, we were afraid it was going to be real hot, so we tried to come up with something real simple but a lot of fun. So I had mentioned, and I can't again remember if I mentioned it in the videos here or I mentioned it on the Sacred and Profane. I know I did a segment on Sacred and Profane that I'm getting ready to put out on Spotify here shortly about it. But had a recipe that was given to me by a neighbor who had gotten it from a neighbor lady who passed away. It's been 10 or 12 years ago, I can't remember, but she was in her late 90s at the time, Miss Ellen Noggle, really nice lady. She was in her late 90s at the time when she passed away. My family knew her family and her husband and her fathers and sisters, etc. Her father, sister, etc. Sisters, etc. for years and years and years. But this other local neighbor had befriended her, quite a bit younger than her. I think he's in his 60s now. Really good guy, got interested in making mead and wine. And so he came to me a few weeks ago when I was on vacation and asked me if I had any of the old timers wine recipes. And I said, yeah. He goes, well, would you mind to share those with me? And I said, yeah, I'll share them with you. I'll share everything that I can with you. I mean, most of those recipes all look pretty much the same. They're, basic, country fruit wines is what they were. A lot of sugar in them. I said, all right, yep, something that takes advantage of, the law of averages of what those guys were all doing back in the day, plus some of the things I learned that made those wines a little bit better and a little more stable and higher quality product as far as I was concerned. And so he was happy with that, so I wrote that all up for him. He came back by here a couple weeks ago and brought me copies of 2 recipe cards from Miss Ellen Noggle. Now, I never knew that she made beer or wine, or that her husband did, or that her family did. Now, it doesn't surprise me at all. There were a lot of people around here that made their own, what they called homebrew and country wines, and several people around here did a little moonshining on the side too. Now, they'd be less apt to admit to the moonshining, obviously, for legal and moral reasons. But it certainly did happen. Anyways, long and short of it is, her recipe basically read that to 5 gallons of water, you would add 1 can of malt extract. So Pabst Blue Ribbon Brewery back in the day when Prohibition hit, they switched over to making malt extract, and they used to sell it all the way up into at least the 90s, maybe the 2000s, I don't know. You could buy it at like JC store, Kroger store, places like that. People used it for baking. Well, and also homebrew, obviously. That's what they were really selling it for, was homebrewers, but a lot of people did use malt extract for baking. So it was 1 can per 5 gallons, 1 pound of sugar per gallon, and 1 pound of white rice per gallon, and a cake of Fleischmann's yeast. So we decided that even though this was labeled as a beer recipe, it kind of looked like a moonshine recipe. So I had never seen the rice in the old beer recipes from around here. That was a new thing to me. So I thought, well, we'll take that out there. I'll get some malt extract. I have my buddy DJ, my brother DJ, stop and pick up some malt extract from one of the homebrew stores down in Louisville. And I thought, we'll make that up and make a wash, and we'll talk about the history of distilling, then talk a little bit about Prohibition, and then talk about Miss Ellen Noggle, and then talk about this beer recipe and everything. And we'll ferment that off and maybe do something else with it and see what happens, see what kind of liquor it makes, and share it with people that would have known Miss Noggle. So that was cool. DJ Henderson went out there with me. Thad Hollow showed up. Tyler Richardson showed up. My brother Brad Leuenberger showed up. My wife and my daughter came out. Of course, we saw all of our friends from Bex Mill, and it wasn't as hot outside today as I thought it was. Real easy mashing, real simple mashing, went really well. had a lot of fun talking to people and explaining to them the history of distilling here in southern Indiana. It was a long intro. I do apologize for that. But anyways, look forward to that episode. I'll read that recipe off directly to you in the episode of One Piece at a Time, Sacred and Profane, which you can listen to on Spotify. As always, be sure to check out if you're into the paranormal, high strangeness, 410, etc. Damn, I got the hiccups. I just got done eating an old-time Tennessee muskmelon out of the garden, and it gave me the hiccups bad. Anyways, check out DalkinsCabinet.com. You can find all of our links to all of our various things there, as well as the If You Have Ghosts, You Have Everything podcast and the Distiller's Talk podcast with Christy Atkinson. So let's get into some questions here. So today from Amir Zukic. Hi, Alan. Here's maybe one interesting topic for you to cover. Recently, I came across this still and was amazed that a long time ago, some French came up with a good idea, using a pot still in combination with preheater to create semi-continuous still. But by my understanding, there is no need for huge stills. You have one still, 100 liters usable space, 100 liters preheater, and with little energy you can, over a bit of longer time for sure, chew up lots of mash. I would like to hear what you think, why distillers are not set up this way, and choose to go with huge stills. Cheers, Amir. So what you're talking about here, Amir, is a Charentais style still that you'll often see used for cognac or sometimes for Calvados even. And even also the little batch columns that they make, that they use for Armagnac and other versions of Calvados, they also often have a preheater. So they typically were using these preheaters in France because, again, you're dealing with seasonal distillation of brandy, of, making wine into brandy. And so there's a spoilage aspect to this, right? So you're trying to get through a bunch of material real fast. So it's nice to be able to basically, what you have is a pot still, and then you have this offset pot that sets to the side, and the arm of the pot still goes through the side corner of this offset pot. And what that does is the steam coming through the swan's neck or the line arm there heats up the offset pot as it goes and condenses, or not condenses, but as it distills. And then that heats up the wine and has it ready, preheated for the next distillation. So there's a drain cock at the bottom of that offset pot that leads into the top of the turnip-shaped still. So when you finish off a batch, you just open the bottom of the still, drain the still off, close the drain on the bottom of the still, go over here to this other preheater, open up the drain cock on that, and drain it into the still. It's already almost up to temperature. You fire it up and you go. Some of them also have like I guess a pre-condenser is what you call it, with a worm inside of it. And then a worm below that has water in it. The top worm holds the wine and heats up the wine prior to distillation as well. It does speed up process. You can get there a lot faster. You don't have to have a huge still. It's a great economy savings for sure. You do occasionally run into Charentais style stills even in American distilleries making whiskey, but they're pretty rare. I don't know why they never became more popular here. Now, back in the 1800s, they were very popular, and a lot of the old farm distilleries even had, if they didn't have a Charentais, they certainly had a way of preheating their mash. Now, the 3 chambers commonly had preheaters on them. I think even Leopold Brothers 3 chamber nowadays does have a preheater on it that's set up the same way I told you earlier with the condenser. I think it's actually used as a deflator at the top of the 3 chamber that has mash running into it that's heating up, right, and getting ready for the next cycle of the 3 chamber. So as you empty the bottom valve, close it, open the chamber, close it, open the chamber, let it drain, close it, open chamber, let it drain, close it, then open the preheater / deflator, drain that into the top chamber, refill the preheater / deflator. I don't know why you don't see a lot more of that. I suspect that maybe over here it's because, we're all dealing with mashes, because bourbon is typically distilled on the grain. You may run into some issues with either scorching that grain as it's setting in there, preheating, right, up against the coils or up against even the line arm of the still, and it might be a little hard to drain a mash with that actual solid in it back into the still as well. I do know that if you don't heat that properly, you don't get heated to the right degree, what can happen is you can shock the copper when you drop it into the still, and you can either collapse the still and or you can crack the still. The other thing that could happen is if you run that too hot, the preheater too hot, you're going to obviously drive some of your alcohol vapor off. So, it has its advantages, certainly for brandy made from actual juice, but it also has some disadvantages depending on what you're doing. Now, I will tell you that this is one of the aspects that Wayne Herbert from Ozark Stillworks and I were working on with our inline thumper setup. You know, we talked about how that could be very similar to a 3-chamber, and you could run it semi-continuously to where everything that would overflow would drop into the boiler at the bottom, and you'd eventually be able to drain some off of the boiler at the very bottom via the bottom valve. Keep refilling new wash or mash into your thumpers above, and keep feeding as you go. Ideally, you would preheat the stuff that's going into those inline thumpers, as it were. We do have it set up now where we have a copper spool on the one inline thumper I have. I've got a second inline thumper coming when Wayne has time to work on it and deal with it, etc. But that copper spool we pour all of our wash or mash into, and it's got a valve on it that you keep closed, and that copper spool of course heats up that wash or that mash before it ever enters that thumper. Now what I would ideally like to have is some sort of a preheated box, or a box that could even mount on there, although that's going to be a little wonky. What I'll probably do is I'll probably set up some kind of a stainless steel pot or something like that that I can put some heat to preheat everything before I ever even pour it into the still or pump it into the still via a pump. So there are applications where having a preheater like that's awesome, and I can tell you, just running semi-continuous on that little not the 3-chamber, but on that little inline thumper that Wayne made on a 5-gallon. I mean, I'd zip through 50 gallons of wash on a 5-gallon boiler with that little one inline thumper on it, and preheating everything before I would dump it into the still. So I think you'll see more of that, and I think as craft distilling becomes a little bit more adventurous, as more home distillers really get into the art of craft distilling and get into the legal industry, you're going to see a lot more cool stuff like that come along. Real throwback to the old school sort of technology and things like that. A lot of that technology requires the distiller to pay a little bit more attention to what they're doing than just a simple pot still does, and so it's, you know, it's not going to be for everybody, and it's very hard when you're running a craft distillery to keep an eye on that while you're also maybe trying to bottle single barrels or do various other tasks around the distillery. But that's a great question, man. Appreciate it. So as always, guys, reach out to me either social media and or the YouTube comments below, and or bishopshomegrown@gmail.com. If I miss your question, I'm sorry. Keep sending it. I will get to it eventually. Your questions keep the channel going, and thank you guys all for the support. Love y'all. Later.